As preparations are underway for the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, there are mixed reactions on her legacy, which some have seen as polarizing. Joining us to share his thoughts on the legacy is Timeslive Editor Makhudu Sefara.
Tobe,
how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm very well, thank you. So in your article or your thought piece, you say there's an earnest attempt to sanitize an inglorious history, which is firmly underway. How so?
Yeah, I mean, so much has been said since the passing of the Queen Elizabeth II, right? And I think there's a dishonest attempt to want to focus on the things that don't matter. Well, I mean, I suppose that the fact that she liked dogs and horses does matter, right? But for me, there are other things that matter more. Things that she could have spoken about, things that she could have helped, through the use of the spoken word or even writing a statement. We are willing to accept that. But she chose silence. She didn't do anything, And I mean, I can go into examples of the things that I think she should have spoken about, So as she was in Cape Town, saying she's feeling at home in South Africa, it's 6,000 miles away from London, but she was feeling home here. So much had happened, and in that speech, she makes reference to, the great history of our forefathers and so on and so on. But when you look at the great history of the forefathers, what you see is a history of conquest, is a history of blood and gore, is a history of a people who went out in the world, conquered countries, killed people, and for me, that's not a great history. If you look at what happened in India, to talk about the forefathers, India was producing food, but food was being taken out of India, out of Bengal, sent to British soldiers to participate in conquests elsewhere. And meanwhile, the people of India were dying. And if you bring it back to our continent, and you start in Kenya, the Kikuyu people, the women, they were raped, were subjected to horrific acts of sexual assault. The men were castrated. There are specific pliers that were created for this. The pliers were such that whatever is contained in the balls must be crushed first, and then the scrotum released or removed. It's so much violence. If you move away from Kenya and you say right here in South Africa, the Afrikaners were put in concentration camps. Africans too were put in those camps as people were fighting for the riches of this country, right? And somebody might argue, listen, I mean, when she addressed the world from Cape Town and as she took over, she was still young, she was in her 20s. I personally accept that and say, okay, yeah, maybe as she was 21, she didn't see clearly. But she went on to sit on the throne for 70 more years. Like later on in her years, in her twilight, she didn't pause to think about the atrocities that were being committed in the name of the British royal family, in the name of the British Empire, at the helm of which she and her family sat.
So we are about to take our viewers to the EFF leader who's giving a closing address. But before we do that, right, so with that context and with that history in mind, you've got people or there is a widely held view that Africa in particular has gone on to maintain the status quo, and that our crop of leaders have done nothing to turn the tide as well. So what role does the continent have in changing or righting some of the wrongs of history?
It's the greatest shame, I think. If you look at the statement released by President Cyril Ramaphosa, he says, he speaks in glorious terms about that history. And I mean, I looked at it and I thought, that's a different column altogether. Like, like, is our president unaware of this history? Couldn't the people who are advising him put a word in the statement that relates the Queen to the colonialism that the British Empire, pursued all over the globe? How do you, or is it perhaps their training in diplomacy that you must just be nice? Somebody has died, and don't go out speaking the truth. This is not the time to speak. Sorry, this is not the time to speak the truth. But I'd say it can't be. When Robert Mugabe died across our border, the English press spoke the truth. They called him out for what he was. We agreed with them in some other respects. When Winnie Madikizela Mandela died, nobody was holding back. They were saying, she is who we know her to be, and that's fine. And we must do the same. We must be consistent, and our leaders must lead from the front. President Cyril Ramaphosa, in my view, dropped the ball, and he's not the only one. Quite a number of them, they are being sheepish and apologetic. The Queen, maybe, who knows, they won't be invited again to London, and I'm just
sure. People who are definitely not being sheepish, right, are young people. Maybe if anything from social media is to measure or is to go by. What have you made of the consciousness of young people around these issues, which maybe sets the tone for the future, right?
Yeah. They are a source of hope, because we might complain in some other spaces and say that, the problem with social media is that there are no editors and it's unfiltered and so on. But from another perspective, it's a blessing, because the history is available online. Whoever is interested to understand who's interested in information about the history of the British royal family, they can go there and find it, and they can make up their minds about how to relate with the Queen. Do you want to mourn, or do you not want to mourn? That professor from Pennsylvania, whose tweet was removed by Twitter, he expressed a thing that many other people agree with. And you might say the owners are engaged in censorship but they can't stop the tide across the globe of people who are saying we can't celebrate the fact that somebody has died, but we have a responsibility for ourselves and for the future to be able to reflect honestly and not sanitize this history, and say, from where we see it, there are atrocities that were committed on our continent. We have not received a single sorry. When our leaders are looking the other way, we don't have to behave like them. We have a responsibility to us and future generations to be honest and call it for what it is. And and if the Queen is wearing a crown that is festooned with diamonds, and we must see it for what it is. We must call it out for what it is. And for many of the young people who are expressing themselves on social media, and certainly for me, that is a crown, that is not literally, but figuratively, dripping with blood. It is a crown that she had an opportunity to change how we look at it, not even by action, by using words, by acknowledging the pain of people of India, of Africa, and of many other people in the colonies, and how the British have related to them, and just say sorry. That's the first step. And then we can talk about reparations and many other things that need to happen in order to change the course of history. Because we can sit here and say Africans are poor today, and look at London, this great city. But that London, the economy of that London, part of the contribution that has went into that economy is Africans some of whom did not even want to contribute. they were chained on our continent, they were put into ships, and some of them didn't even make it across. They died on the way, and then they were thrown into the ocean. And those who made it got there and became slaves and contributed to that economy. The same applies to America, right? To broader Europe. Africans were used as slaves to help those economies become what those economies are. And saying that doesn't mean that we don't have agency to help contribute and think about how to improve our own economy. But it is to acknowledge a historical fact, to say, you know, there's riches and there's progress that we're seeing elsewhere. Africa has contributed to it willingly and unwillingly, and that the Queen for 70 years sat on the throne, and maybe perhaps on the throats of many Africans. But the point is that she had an opportunity to just say many of the things, I didn't see them when I was young, but in her twilight she had an opportunity to say, listen, but we can't condone what has happened here. It's barbaric, it's barbarism of the West order. Sure. And so therefore, as responsible adults, we need to say to Africa, India, and many others, that we are sorry for what happened. Sure.
You know, you speak of very uncomfortable things like, you know, the point of slavery and how Britain eventually became this quote-unquote great city, right? So there's also a part of history that is very uncomfortable, especially for Africans, because you would find that there were some Africans who sold other Africans into slavery, right? So when we talk about the role of Africa today, are we not perpetuating the things of our forebears, right? When a number of young people seem to be enslaved by the rulers of today's Africa, right? A lack of opportunity. You take a look at West Africa, where literally young people who should be protecting their countries are burning their countries because they believe the countries don't work for them.
And you know, we have Steve Biko to thank, because he did tell us that the greatest asset in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of those who are oppressed. And so we as Africans need to free ourselves from this thinking that even where we have an opportunity to wage a broader, bigger, important struggle, but to just use words to express ourselves, that we must be fearful of those who used to oppress us, and say, you know, we must choose our words carefully. And I'm not saying that anyone must not be careful in how they choose their ways. But I'm just saying, don't be too choosy to a point you are not expressing your true innermost feelings about a particular subject. That you can say the Queen was wrong. You can say the Queen had an opportunity to do right, but the Queen didn't. You know, and if that is your view, you should be able to say so. Right? But as you point out, the thing that is correct, that is happening, is that our leaders today, the African Union, you know, our own presidents in Africa and elsewhere, have a particular fear of just expressing themselves, of just saying that, you know, if you have a diamond that was taken from here unjustly, and we are sitting with Alex and its challenges, and Alex has been like that pre-democracy, and even in the 28th of democracy it remains like that. And how do we change the lives of those people without our leaders being able to speak truth to those who are in power elsewhere? It's a great injustice, you know, so to put it.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. You can find Makhudu Sefara's opinion piece in the Insight section of the Sunday Times. You can grab your copy for more on that. Malebo, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's remind